It's. I always think that if a story wants to be told and if it's worth telling, it will find a way of being told.
I like that.
It's sort of whether it's just a few things that happen that you could define as fate or.
Welcome back, or welcome to another episode of the Success Times Happiness podcast. I'm your host, Richard Thompson, and today we have a very special guest, Marcus Cobbledick. He is arguably Australia's premier producer, director, filmmaker of sporting documentaries, long-form sporting documentaries, and award-winning absolute legend of a guy as well. And I was very fortunate that he has been at the forefront of the Ultraman documentary, together with my very good friend and business partner, Cody Osborne, as director of photography. And just, it's been an amazing experience to share my life with him, and unique as well in the sense that you've been able to share your most inner thoughts and deepest feelings with someone who lives down in Victoria or, hundreds of thousands of kilometres away. So he's agreed to come onto the show. I can't wait to sit down with him, talk to him about his experiences, almost like roles reverse, because he's usually the one interviewing me. So here we go, Marcus Cobbledick.
You've interviewed some very interesting people, mate, but you must have been scraping the bottom of the barrel to when my name came up.
To be fair, we wanted to do it when you were up here and not have it over the internet. But how it played out in May, we all got on flights, early flights, and I wasn't in a state to be keen to chat. So you were probably, actually, to be truthfully honest, you were probably guest number 3 on our list. But fortunately or unfortunately, it means that we have to do it on the internet. So thank you so much.
No worries,
I should probably
Richard.
introduce you and say, Marcus Cobbledick, welcome to the podcast.
Lovely to be with you, Richard. It's nice. It's nice to have the tables turned and you're interviewing me.
Yes. Yeah, if you can just explain a little bit more about that, what you just said, that'd be really appreciated, as you would always ask me. So I guess let's start from the top, Marcus. How would you if someone said, what do you do for a living? What did you say in the passport when you went to Hawaii? How would you describe yourself what would you do for a job?
I think primarily as a filmmaker, but really, I guess more broadly as a storyteller, because I guess storytelling lends itself to design, long form, short form storytelling, and even with the film posters that I design, I even see that as a form of storytelling as well. So I think that more broadly, that's probably what I'd say. What
got you into that storytelling creative piece? Is that something that's always been with you growing up?
I've always loved a good story, and my grandfather was a particularly good storyteller, and he made it to 100, and he had a lot of interesting stories or interesting parts to his life. And I really started to get into documentary filmmaking really through interviewing him when he was in his 90s. I just started asking him questions about his life, and it was quite therapeutic for him. It was almost I could tell that, I think because we were touching on some wonderful highlights of his life, but also some real challenges as well. He spent 7 years in an orphanage here in South Melbourne, and he told us some incredible stories about escaping once from an orphanage and with his mate, and sleeping out rough for a couple of nights, and just dreaming and searching for his mother, which he missed so dearly. And I think that talking about these types of stories was, I guess, somewhat painful, but also to tell these stories out loud and tell them in his way made them it made it cathartic. It was a cathartic process for him. And I guess that I just got the impression that every time we finished a session, and often these interviews would go for hours on end, he felt lighter, emotionally and also, I guess, mentally. And I think that's when I realised, well, it's when I discovered my love for interviews and also for collecting stories, but also I loved what it could give someone else also.
Yeah. I found in my own experience with you that as the person, when I was in front of the camera, your ability to hold space and to be empathetic and to allow that moment to unravel, or that moment of me telling a story or me describing something, you're able to do that, and with such softness. And I guess my question is, do you pay homage to that experience with your grandfather? Because that would have been challenging in the sense of the topics that he was talking about. Or have you found that you have always had that ability to read a situation and to be soft with it?
I think that that's what I get most out of the interview process, and also collecting stories. Like I guess that, as you know yourself, most times when you're interviewing someone, you know the answer, or at least you should if you're trying to craft something. But I kind of find that for me, it's the most rewarding part of the filmmaking process when you're completely absorbed into this answer, and often the highlight for me is that the spark in the eyes and the joy or the emotion that an interviewee will give you in front of camera, that often forms the nucleus of the story and what you're trying to achieve. So it kind of, I've been fortunate enough to do a lot of interviews. Everybody's different. Everybody is willing to give. Some people are willing to give a lot of themselves. Others aren't. And I guess that what I find though is that it's just such a buzz to completely be absorbed in that moment. And I mean, to answer your question, I think I like to think that I've always been a good listener, but I think it's really just, it's what you get back. I really ride every bump of the answer. I can kind of I feel that a story, the process of making films is very emotional for me. When I edit films, I get incredibly emotional. Even cutting together a trailer, I feel it. Mm. That's the way that I seem to work.
And is that when you boil down to your primary reasons of why you do it? How would you describe that?
I think again, it's ultimately the story, but why I do the documentary, the long form documentary storytelling, is because, particularly with the observational style documentaries, you never know where the story could go, and it's so exciting following something and capturing how a story or someone's journey is progressing, and having no idea what's going to happen next. That in a way is that excitement is quite infectious, and that's the main driver for me.
You're married with a couple of kids. How do you manage on a daily, weekly, monthly basis when, I guess, you work for yourself and you might have jobs where you have to? I know you went to the Northern Territory to do shoots, and you went to Hawaii with me and with Codes. How do you manage it all on a family level? How does that work?
Well, I knew pretty early on when I started making documentaries that it was going to be very difficult to make it a full-time job. So I knew that I had to balance out some of those longer form projects with smaller projects or my freelance work. So for me, it's a bit of a balancing act. It's I enjoy the small projects because not only do they pay the bills, but they also I like to see the end of them. They start and they finish. Whereas with with feature length films, you kind of particularly the ones that I seem to make, the story waits for no one, so you have to keep filming, and you often you don't know where the footage is going to end up, and in some cases, some footage might never see the light of day. So it's kind of I've been able to make the filmmaking work through the balance of freelance work. And
your kids, how do they see Dad and what he does?
They're always telling me that I should be making more kids animation, or just stuff that they want to watch, because quite frankly, I don't think that they see the content that I make that interesting. No offense, Richard.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I think my kids can attest to that as well.
Yeah. I think it's my son, I remember sitting, he was probably about 7 when All for One was released, and I remember he sat in one of our test screenings. The language in that film isn't ideal for a 7-year-old, so that was a little bit of a risk, but he got the themes, and I think he had a lot of suggestions on how I could make the film better. Who I could cut out, and who we needed to dial up a bit.
Yeah, take that on notice, I guess. Thanks for the tips.
Yeah.
I'd like to delve into a couple of those stories. Firstly, with Fearless, you told me about the fact that, and if anyone hasn't seen it, it's a wonderful story about a cycling story in Australia. But the fact that the documentary proper was about a particular event, Masters World Championships, and it didn't go to plan. He didn't win. And then that was the end of the documentary. But the following year, which I didn't know until you told me, the following year he won. He went back and won by a country mile. But there was something that I would love you to talk about, which I thought that impressed me a lot, was this idea that the story doesn't need a fairy tale to be a worthwhile story. And in fact, by him not winning, it almost made the story.
Yeah, that's right. I guess, don't get me wrong, he actually missed out. He was runners-up by 2 millimetres, and which added a little bit of drama to the end, because we were able to get cameras into one of the booths where the photo finish was being examined. But it was, I think, the way that Steve took that loss, and just to give you a bit of background on the story, Steve represented Australia at the Olympics back in the Seoul Olympics in '88. He was, to support his young family, he went back to dairy farming, which is how my family knew him. And later in life, I think it was in his mid-40s, he returned to the sport and re-established himself as one of the best cyclists in Australia, despite his age. And I think for him, it was unfinished business, that he always had this regret that he didn't give himself the chance to become a pro when he clearly had the attributes to do it. And I guess that going to the World Masters Games in Slovenia that year was his opportunity to, I guess, prove himself on the world stage. And he, despite the narrow loss, it's the way that he accepted that and dealt with it. In the short to medium term after that really defined him as a person. I thought he was able to realise what place it's sat in his overall in the grander scheme of things, and he was able to come back the next year and do one better. But he was kind of Steve was a pretty unique character. He quite an endearing sort of person who, although you really wanted him to win, you wanted him to be able to achieve something special for himself. But he kind of, there were so many other factors that made it overall, it made it a really positive experience for him and the viewers.
Yeah. It's it's an exceptional piece of film. Then All for One comes, whereby it's probably somewhat of a different project to document green edge cycling and the years leading up to, I guess, when you started to film live and do the interviews and be on, I guess, on site with them. But there's a lot of footage already captured. How was that experience? How do you reflect on that and the popularity of that documentary?
When Dan Jones and Orica Green Edge came to us and said, we've got 5 years, I think it was 4,000 hours worth of footage that we've collated over a 5-year period. And of course the Backstage Pass episodes, which Dan Jones created, I think there was 200 episodes. And it was really from a storytelling point of view, it was a dream come true, because you had so many wonderful things, wonderful story beats and events that had happened over that period. It was, you could pick and choose what worked. You could pick and choose different writers, different characters, different coaches. And really, we had the start of a story and even the middle, but we needed an end. And we just had to keep our options open. And that's where, I guess, Esteban Chavez and Matt Heyman's personal stories really came to the fore. And I remember back in 2016 when we were desperately searching for an ending, imagining if Matthew Heyman could possibly win his, a Roubaix, Paris-Roubaix. I think it was his 19th that he won. And I understand that he's been a guest on your show as well, Richard.
Yeah, that's the circles that we reside in here in the podcast. Yep.
And when we woke up and heard the news that he'd won, we knew straight away that we'd found our ending.
Yeah.
All of those events that took place only covered us half the way in terms of what we needed to complete to finish the film, because, as you know, there was a lot of incredible amount of interviews that went into it, and not just riders and staff from the team, but also cycling people, whether they be from the media or experts. And it was piecing it together was quite challenging in post-production. Our assembly edit, I remember, would have been about 130, 140 minutes long, and we had to condense that down into 100. And I guess that it was just, I found that process just grueling, because you can work half the time to get a film 90% complete, but you'll do another 50% of your effort just to complete the remaining 10%. And it was almost like the way that you train or you prepare for an Ultraman event. You're looking for the 1%ers.
Yeah.
And all of those collating feedback and advice and say, right, can we change this? Can we shift this? And you're crafting it and even listening to my son's advice. Maybe that's an extra 1% that we can take. Just you're willing to listen to anyone. And I guess that would be my advice for young filmmakers or anyone in the creative industries, is that know when to get advice from people and know who to get it off, because timing's important. You can't just put something out for feedback every round. You've got to know when to get it or when it's ready to show.
And that comes down to, I guess, believing or trusting your own intuition, does it not?
Yeah, that's right. Like I've shown films to organisations too soon, and there's when they're not ready, and when it's a little too rough. But on some occasions, if you show the right people at the right time, and when I say right people who understand what a rough cut is, as opposed to a final cut, you kind of people who know what they're looking at, and they know what they're looking for as well. So all of those things went into crafting the story, but in the end, we laboured over all of those decisions in post-production, and then you finally package it up, you put it out to the world, we premiered at the Melbourne International Film Festival in 2017, and we got an incredible response. We won the audience award at the festival that year, and we had a large theatrical release with, I think, about 150 screens. And it was such a buzz to see the non-cycling audience get the themes in the film and just fall in love with these characters. And that was the most rewarding thing, I think, is to see the wives and the partners of the cyclists enjoying it as much as what, you know, the cycling world were. And I guess and even the festival crowd, they brought a festival crowd, they got it. And there was 6 AFL clubs that watched the film inside their rooms, and I think some NRL clubs as well. And they used it. Richmond Football Club used it as the sort of inspiration behind their 2017 finals campaign, which they ultimately won. Yeah.
And on that, and trusting your intuition along that process, you've recently, you and I have been talking about, you had an experience where you were suffering from anxiety about a particular project, and you didn't feel comfortable with the work you were doing or the people that you were working with. Can you talk about that experience? Because it's not obviously all sunshine and rainbows and premieres.
Yeah, definitely. I guess I have worked on large projects in the past where they haven't been greenlit or fully funded up front. And as I said before, the story waits for no one. So you're self-funding just to keep collecting footage and to keep up with, you know, the journey, the story as it unfolds. And on this particular project, I had a co-producer, I was directing, and it just got to the point where our working relationship was no longer workable, and we had to sort of part ways, which was really hard to do. It was because when you fall in love with a story and the characters, which are real life people, you want to not only see their story told, but you want to also you want to be able to finish something that you've worked really hard on, and that was difficult. There was also, you know, it was pretty messy in regards to the contracts and the legalities, and also the working relationships that had been broken. It certainly was a massive learning lesson for me on you've got to be careful who you work with. You've got to be really selective. And in this case, I was introduced, and a lot of people who I trusted blessed the project and blessed this working arrangement. So it was kind of, but in my gut, it didn't feel right. Even though a lot of people were saying it's fine. In my gut, I didn't fully trust this person, and in the end, my gut was right. So that certainly says something. But it's taken a lot of healing to get over that. I mean, I was inspired by seeing the work that you did with Julie Robinson, last year or the year before, and I just realised that earlier this year that I had some healing to do, and I had some other sort of anxiety issues just through, my freelance taking a downturn, and just like so many people in the creative industries have felt, this year. And I reached out to Julie, and I've done some sessions with her, and I that wouldn't have happened unless I saw. Unless I worked with you and worked on this film that we've been working on together. So I thank you for that. And I do feel, her techniques and the processes that she uses, they help frame, they help put things in perspective, but more than anything, they give you tools and techniques that you can use to get through challenging times. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's really beautiful that you reached out and that she's made such an impact on your healing, as she did for mine, for sure.
Yeah.
Now, I know you can be truthfully honest at this question, but what were your takeaways for the Ultraman experience?
You mean the most recent one?
No, just the whole process with going, I guess firstly learning about it and then coming to Hawaii and all of it.
It's been, when you first called me back in 2018 and told me about your plans and this ambitious goal that you'd set, I didn't know what to make of it because I didn't know much about the sport and yourself, really. So the penny didn't drop for me. And even though we had talked so many times on the phone and Cody and shot so much footage and really the story was evolving, and through the amazing video diaries that you've done, the story was evolving. That, by the way, seeing the way that you were able to do those video diaries and give so much of yourself and be so honest and courageous in the way that you delivered those, that really kept me going. And it sort of, I guess, it made me realise that you were in it for on deeper levels, not just achieving a goal and following someone who ultimately, could succeed or break a world record, but you were willing to show a lot of yourself and show an audience something much deeper. So that's what I mean by kept me going, or at least as I spoke before about story and what motivates me in documentary storytelling. That was certainly, I found that really engaging. But it wasn't until I got to Hawaii and saw the Ultraman, family, the Ultraman world in person, that I got it, that I understood the sort of caliber of people that were involved in the sport, but also the fascinating stories. Like before Ultraman Australia, on the registration day, Cody and I set up our camera and we shot little 10-minute interviews with almost half of the competitors or the participants in that race, and every one of them had their own unique, powerful story. And I was just blown away by it. There was some ladies who had survived breast cancer. There was one lady who had a pacemaker put in last year. There was so many people who had sacrificed so much just to be there at that start line. And it really, I know that most sports, you'll get great stories, but I think that with Ultraman, because of the distances, because of the discipline, those stories and those sacrifices are greater, much greater than average.
Yeah, well put. Certainly a unique group of people, that's for sure.
And just can I add also, Richard, like since then, I thought over those 3 days, obviously things didn't go to plan for you, but it was very evident interviewing people very close to you who, and even yourself, that could talk about how far you've come as a person over the last couple of years and what you've achieved in that realm. It was very evident to me that the result was just, it didn't matter. It was, and that's when I realised what the real story was. And when I got back, I wasn't quite sure what to think or how to approach the next stage of the project. But in recent weeks, through just working through a lot of my own stuff that I mentioned before, I've been able to pick up my motivation, and I'm starting to feel the fires coming back, and it feels good. Yeah, because I know that this story could really inspire and educate a lot of people.
Yeah, I think the people close to me would know that I'm not. I'd be much prefer the film to do very well, and for me not to be known that that was me, and to have a different name on the credits, or not to have that light, however big or small it becomes or is. But I do feel that, and a huge half of my value system is to help others, and I feel like there's a lot in it to help others who are going through trauma and dealing with loss, however that is defined in someone's life. And it's ridiculous to look back on what I have experienced since I called you in 2018, even before that. Yeah, whenever I spoke to you in first instance, it's unfathomable, and but I would attest to that position that I feel like I'm a much better person because of that journey. And I have a lot to thank for you, Marcus, in the sense that because of your belief in the project, because of your belief in me, it held me accountable, I think, to be probably more introspective than I would have otherwise, going through that trauma and through that loss. And I think as it's because of that expedited nature of the self-reflection and and then being able to, and I'm a fairly good communicator, but being able to sit down with a camera in a downstairs room, not as well lit as this, and just talk about how I'm feeling and how I'm coping or not coping. It was really cathartic, and I know that you weren't there looking at me when I talked to you. I was looking at the black circle of a camera, but it definitely felt like you were there, and there was somebody, even as impartial or as out of the loop, out of the circles, out of my life, as detached as you were. It was wonderful to have that. And so if I can recommend the takeaway, I think, is that if you're going through a really, really challenging time in your life, either call you, Marcus Cobbledick. Your number will be at the bottom of the show notes for anyone to call you. And no, I'm just joking. And or get a film crew and get them to demand that you speak to a camera every week and to lay out how you're feeling, because it's essentially a new age way of journaling, right? To be able to talk and to talk out what your experience is and the challenges you're facing. And I think, as I said, because of that, I've been able to, it hasn't been easy and hasn't been necessarily quick, but I think it's really helped truncate the period of time of my recovery or my growth or my getting through that grief and loss than ordinarily I would have. So I thank you for that.
Yeah. And I could certainly see that coming through as well in the video diaries. I could tell that it was cathartic, and it was but not only that, you're so great at articulating yourself in the emotional realm. A lot of men don't have that. They couldn't identify the feeling or the emotion as well as you do. So that was kind of, I think, even more important for you to be able to get that off your chest. And
I obviously I've been exposed to the film industry as a general whole, and the meeting you as a prime positive example. But also we've gone through our fair share of meetings with other producers and other people who have come and gone through the project. And then me coming from, I guess, a relative corporate background, there's so many times I've been in disbelief as to how the film industry works generally. But the question I have is, what would you change with the film industry, with the documentary, let's say, the long-form documentary industry in Australia, if you could?
I'd make it easier for feature documentaries to be funded. At the moment, the traditional model is to get to apply for funding through your state and federal funding bodies, and you need private money. Ideally, you need a broadcast deal or a distributor attached. So you need a lot of different parts, a lot of different pockets of money coming together to fully finance your film, and they're expensive to make. Even low budget docs, by the time you pay a small crew and you pay an editor and you do a grade and a sound mix at the end of the process, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. So they're difficult to get up and running. And quite often, particularly with factual, you have to shoot quite a large chunk of the story in order to cut together a sizzle reel and prove it as a concept for these funding bodies. So you accept the fact there's a lot of work, a lot of work for nothing. You won't get paid for just to get them up and running, and that's what I've found difficult over the last couple of years. Is just the time you put into getting them packaged and presented. You've got to be very selective on which stories you go for, and also just, again, as I talked about before, it's just that balancing act of making sure it's not getting in the way of those smaller projects that can pay the bills.
And also, as you said, especially when the story waits for no one and the story may not the story might evolve to the point where it doesn't allow you to actually finish the project, and the actual story is just not worth telling, as maybe because of the result or because of the change of the story or the change of the situation. So you've spent all this time not even getting to the sizzle reel part because there's not actually a story to finish.
Yeah. Although I always think that if a story wants to be told and if it's worth telling, it will find a way of being told.
I like that.
It's sort of, whether it's just a few things that happen that you could define as fate, or I felt that way with Fearless, because it was I pitched it in at Steve as a 5 to 10 minute short film that might play online, and then all of a sudden he's one of his sponsors is paying for me to go to Slovenia and film with him, and all of a sudden it's 50 minutes long and been accepted into film festivals. And at no stage early in my career did I set out to be a director. It literally came off the back of that opportunity. So it's kind of, as I said before, every story or every journey will play out in some way. And it's sort of, at the time you might not think it's interesting, but it's kind of quite often, if you just keep capturing it, it will it'll have its own way. And I mean, when you think about your story, Richard, over the last couple of years, last 5 years since we first started talking, you could never envisage the way that those 5 years would play out. In particular, probably the last, even the last six months. So it's kind of, that's almost, I guess, proof in that concept is that not every story will have as many twists and turns as that, but it's kind of, it'll still be, if you're able to look for the right things and ask the right questions and be in the right places, you'll always get something.
How can someone hone their skills to be a better storyteller, do you think, Marcus?
I think it's about perception. As I just mentioned, it's about seeing opportunities. Sometimes they're disguised. Sometimes they're right in front of you and you don't quite recognize them. Mm-hmm. I sort of feel like with storytelling, it could be, you might get a great little piece of footage through just something you noticed earlier when someone might have been walking off set or walking out of a building, and you might think, well, what are they doing? I might just follow them for a little while. And you're using your gut instinct, but you're also you need to be perceptive about what's around you and pick up on people's body language and subtleties of emotions and facial expressions, that kind of thing. Yeah, that's the great thing about documentary storytelling as opposed to scripted storytelling where you're trying to get a performance out of an actor. I think that different skill set and different. I think you need to try and connect with people on a more authentic level as well.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I can get that. Well, this has been really, really lovely. And I don't know whether the first cut or whether it depends when Codes edits this start of this interview, but we were wanting to get you on very early in the show in May, but obviously the result, everyone jumped on flights early and it was all a bit of a kerfuffle after that. But I really appreciate your time now, and it's really beautiful to connect again and see you in person, or see you not in person but on the screen. We'll leave today with the usual rapid fire questions, which the first one is the number one tip for people that you would have for people wanting to be more successful in their life.
I think that people trying to be more successful, as I mentioned before, seeing an opportunity. Before I was talking about the context of storytelling, but I think that it works in life. You've got to be perceptive enough to recognise an opportunity, even when it's disguised in front of you. I always think that if you're able to generate opportunities through doing your best work every time, more opportunities will come out of that. And you've just got to make it a real habit of nailing every opportunity. So getting the most out of every one of them, and hopefully that can generate success.
I like that. Number one tip for people wanting to be more happy in their life?
Julie Robinson, who I mentioned before, told me recently that happiness, if you wait for everything in your world to align perfectly before you're happy, you will probably be only happy about 10% of your life. Happiness is a state of mind which you can reach out and grab and tap into anytime. And I know that if there's an enormous amount of challenges in your life, well, that's going to be very difficult. But I guess that if you're truly grateful for what you have and you practice that daily, your gratitude levels will be entrenched into your everyday life, and reaching into that happiness at any time won't be that big a problem.
It's almost giving yourself the authority or giving yourself the power to
permission.
Yeah, exactly. And not being powerless to that, and just going, well, X, Y, Z happened, so I can't be happy now. But in fact, it's saying you've always got the power to be in that state. There's
always something going on. You know, why not just reach out and grab it now and make a practice of it? That's, to me, I only heard that for the first time 2 or 3 weeks ago, and it's probably stayed with me more than anything else that came from those sessions.
Yeah, great. Most gifted or favourite book in your library?
I've got it right here, actually. It's the Secret Race by Tyler Hamilton, and it's what I love about that book is that it's just so authentic. It was the book that he wrote. He was Lance Armstrong's teammate back in the US postal days, and he was, that book was written probably before, about 2 or 3 years before Lance came out, or Lance was forced to come out. And I guess it just, it goes into detail about what happened during those years. And I think I just loved the honesty of Tyler, and how he wrote it in such a matter of fact way, that it kind of didn't make it, there was no shame in the way that he wrote it. And I think that's kind of what made it unique. Yeah.
The most influential person in your life?
I think professionally it would be Paul Wiegard, my boss at Madman Entertainment. I was there at that business, which is Australia's leading independent film distributor. I was there for almost 15 years, and he was a huge supporter, and still is a huge supporter of me as a filmmaker, but also as a creative. So he is the most influential creatively,
personally
and professionally.
Personally,
I think probably my parents. Yeah, my mum in particular, and just I guess interviewing your mum, Richard, who's an exceptional lady. She her strengths and her wisdom come through, and she reminds me a bit of my mum.
Yeah, beautiful. And then finally, one guest, famous or not, you think we should have on the podcast?
I'd like to recommend my co-director for All for One, Dan Jones.
Yeah, okay.
Because
I love that.
Yeah, because Dan's a real character, and he's got a lot of wonderful stories. Traveling with a pro tour team, a lot of stories that didn't make the cut in All for One that he'd be able to share with you. And the other one is Julie Robinson. I think she'd be wonderful on your podcast also.
It's a fair shout. We'll probably get both of them on pretty soon. So
yeah, if you want Dan's contacts, let us know.
All right, very, very good. Marcus, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, particularly on a school night. And now we've sorted out daylight saving. It's later than we expected, but I really appreciate it. And yeah, I can't explain to you the amount of gratitude I have for your time and energy over the last 5 years. So hopefully we can get this out and everyone can see the fruits of our labour, and for Cody as well.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks for having me, guys. Cheers.
Thanks, mate. That was Marcus Cobbledick, such an amazing human being, and I'm so fortunate to be able to have spent so much time with him on the phone, in person, travelling, talking over the last half a decade. Really hope that we can get the film out to cinemas and to streaming in the next year so everyone can see how incredible he is at what he does. So hopefully you enjoyed that interview. Please share it if you did. Please follow us along on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And until next time, peace.